Carne, former head of Middle East policy for the UK mission to the United Nations, former head of the Arab Israel desk at the Foreign Office. How much of a mixed message is it that with one hand we're sending £50 million, but here in the UK it would be a banned organisation? Good morning.
Yeah, it is a bit of a mixed message. You're entirely right. On the other hand, I don't think HTS will care too much at this rather chaotic point in Syria's future, and I think they should welcome government contact. I'm sure that MI6 or SIS have been in contact with HTS on the ground. After all, they've been in power, well, not really in power, but they've been in control of Damascus for the last week. I very much hope that they have been in contact, in fact. And of course, it makes entirely reasonable sense to be talking to the new dispensation in Syria today.
How should the world prepare for a Syria that might be led or part led by HTS?
The world needs to emphasize to any new government in Syria that there must be an inclusive Syrian-owned political process, perhaps to prepare a new constitution, but certainly to have free and fair elections. Syria is a very diverse and now very fragmented country, and if there is to be any hope of stability and an end to violence, there has to be such an inclusive process. There can't be a kind of top-down Islamist rule imposed on Syria.
Well, Mr. Ross, you'll know far more than most about HTS, certainly far more than I do. When you talk about free and fair elections, how confident are you that would be one of their goals?
I think the jury's out. I don't think anybody can be particularly confident or not confident. I mean, their leader has spoken of inclusivity as one of his values in governing Syria. Of course, that's to be welcomed, but the test is whether they will actually have democratic elections. There are, very different populations, ethnic populations, but also people of different political views in Syria. I'm concerned, for instance, about what's going on in the northeast, where Turkish-backed militias are attacking Syrian Kurds right now as we speak. It's barely mentioned in the press, but that has to stop.
What would you want to see first as a gesture of good intent from HTS?
Well, what they are doing is reaching out to other political and military groups in Syria, forging local ceasefires, agreeing to end violence, agreeing on arrangements of local governance, shared governance in towns which are contested between various groups. That has been happening to a degree. That is a first test, and so far so good. But of course, it's very, very early days.
Lastly, is it time to deprescribe, if there is such a word, HTS in the UK?
I'm never particularly in favour of prescription in any case, because it stops us, or at least limits us, talking to people. Not talking to Hamas in recent years was a mistake. We need to have communication with political groups with influence on the ground. That makes obvious sense.
Carne, thank you. You were head of Middle East policy for the UK mission to the United Nations, former head of the Arab Israel desk at the Foreign Office, 11 minutes after 7. Let's turn to David Wooding, former editor of the Sunday Express, political commentator, who joins me now. Let's talk a little bit about where the funds are going. There are so many areas it could go to here in the UK, from, health to housing, pensions and schools. Is it the right look, David? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. I think nobody would really begrudge the millions of people who've suffered at the hands of Assad's reign of terror, not to mention the 14 years of civil war that have racked Syria. There's 16 million people in need of shelter and food. There's about 7 million internally displaced and another 5 million in the 5 neighbouring countries. I think most British people are kind in that way. It amounts to, another issue is it amounts to £50 million, amounts to less than a pound a head of population. But you know what? There's got to be strings attached, Nick, and not so much strings as heavy ropes. There are concerns, as you mentioned earlier, and as Carne accepted, that HTS remain a prescribed organisation, which was once an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. So what we need to see from them is that human rights will be honoured, not a non-sectarian giving out of aid. Women and minorities, not to mention Christians, should not be discriminated against. And then we need action about the chemical weapons. Will they destroy Assad's chemical weapons and reject terror even? So all these assurances need to be given. But the other problem for Keir Starmer in doing this is that a lot of people think charity should begin at home, and at a
Yes.
time when people like pensioners are being deprived of their winter fuel allowance, people will be saying, well, what about the people at home? What about the homeless? Can't we spend this money better at home? And that is a political problem for Keir Starmer.
Is there also a problem, David? We're speaking on the day when a poll comes out that shows that Sir Keir's popularity is the lowest, after just 5 months, is the lowest approval rating in modern history at this stage of his premiership, worse than people such as Mrs Thatcher, John Major, Boris Johnson and everyone else. Is there a danger this is a regime that's looking too far outside, i.e. it concentrates on foreign policy, not enough on domestic policy?
Indeed, Keir Starmer's been dubbed Never Hear Keir because he's always seen on the foreign stage, and that seems to be the last resort of a prime minister who's not doing well at home to stick himself with world leaders abroad, get out the country and leave his ministers to deal with it. And there's a little bit of criticism behind the scenes of Keir Starmer for that. He would argue, of course, that he's doing his job. But yes, there's a lot of foreign focus from the government here, and people at home are crying out for things to be done in the UK.
David, thanks for your time. David Wooding, former editor of the Sunday Express, political commentator, giving views there. Just to point out, Sir Keir's not here today either. He happens to be in Norway.